Hey guys, it's Paige. I am back from my vacation. I didn't fall off a zip line and I didn't drown, so I'm here. And today we're going to talk about interior design. And I was originally going to combine these videos, but I decided that interior design, there's a lot to talk about. So I went ahead and thought I'll just go ahead and do a separate video. So you can follow along with my blog post. It's on the Infinity Flower Publishing Facebook page. It's not quite as in-depth as what I've got here today, but you can still look at it and, like I said, follow along. So let's just go ahead and get straight into it since there's a lot to cover. What is interior design? Interior design is everything that you see inside of your book. It's how your book looks. It's how it appeals to your eye. Where your eye goes when you're looking at it, if you're, for your reader and things like that. It's one of those things that you don't realize how important it is unless it's wrong. And then you're like, oh man, this looks crazy. So what we want to talk about is typesetting. Typesetting is making sure that your letters are lined up right, that your spacing's right, that your margins are right, that you have a nice, good construction of your book. Now some of the things that you include in your typesetting are going to be like your text style. Do you have justified or do you have ragged? In Return to Royalty, mine is justified. So as you can see here, there's a nice straight line that goes down the page. That's justified. Ragged, on the other hand, would be where the words don't quite form such a straight line. They're a little bit off. Justified is good. It's a little bit more formal. It's the standard. Then on the other hand, ragged is a little more casual. So it just kind of depends on what the tone is of your book, what your subject matter is, what kind of text style you want to go with. Then of course you have your margins, which is all of this white space here on the side. Those are the margins across the top, across the bottom. You also have a margin inside your binding. Bindings are a little bit funky because when you're putting your design together, you have to allow for the fact that you're gonna pinch all this together. So you actually have to offset your I believe it's called the gutter. You have to offset your gutter by 1/8 of an inch. So if you're doing it yourself, if you're doing it in InDesign or whatever, you need to make sure that you adjust it accordingly, because otherwise your text is going to it's going to look like it's being sucked into the middle of your book, and you don't want that. You also have to think about your fonts. You have to think about your font sizes. Really like these arbitrary... Stupid Siri. You have to think about your fonts. You have to think about your font sizes. Typically, you have 70 characters per line, so you want to make sure that your font's not too big and that it's not too small and that everything fits within that space that you have there. You have to think about your book block, which is what makes your book look like a book. So for my book, what I would do if I was making a book block is I would size my page in my program to the 5x8 trim size. And then I would add my margins and my headers and my footers and that everything all together. And then of course my gutter and everything. That's your book block. So you want to make sure that you have that formatted appropriately to fit whatever trim size you're getting. You also have widows and orphans. You don't want to leave words just kind of hanging on the end of lines. That's distracting, and like if you had a word that rolled over and it was the only word on a page, it just looks funny. You don't see that. So you want to make sure that you adjust your lines accordingly. I like to use InDesign because InDesign will allow you to adjust the space between your letters, between your words, and then between your lines. So you have a lot of ways that you can pull your text together if you need to. You also want to think about your alignment. You want to think about how your words all line up. You can do stuff like text wrapping with where you have a hyphen, but you have to make sure that everything looks lined up appropriately. You want to make sure your spacing is good because you don't want your words too far apart because then that doesn't look right. You want to make sure that you use the proper dashes. There's an M dash and an N dash, and one of them is shorter than the other. So it's the N dash. The N dash is half the length of an M dash. I don't know if you can tell, it's E-N, N dash, that's the short one, E-M, that's the long one. Those kinds of things are generally found in your Chicago Manual of Style, this guy. I got this book on barnesandnoble.com. It was half price on sale. I don't know if it's still on sale. This is great to have. I don't know about outside of the US, but for here in the United States, this is the standard that most anybody who writes anything goes by this. So magazines, newspapers, publishers, everybody uses this Chicago Manual Style. And it's really great. It's huge. It's got a lot of information, but it'll tell you how to use commas appropriately. It'll tell you how to use abbreviations. It'll tell you how to use names. Like if you're talking about the President of the United States, it'll tell you when it's appropriate to capitalize it, when it's appropriate not to capitalize it. It'll tell you how to use like Queen and stuff like that. It's really great. It's got a lot of really good stuff in it. So you definitely should have a Chicago Manual of Style in your arsenal. You also want to think about small caps. Now, small caps are interesting in your design because if your caps are bigger than the rest of your text, it looks like you're screaming, and you don't want that. That's distracting to the reader. It could pull them out of the story. You really don't want that. So when you use caps, you want to use small caps. And I didn't realize how much of an effect that had until I actually saw it in my own book. And that is, where'd it go? Right here. This word right here. Slow. As you can see, it's small caps. It's not bigger than the rest of the text around it. It actually looks a little bit shorter. And when you read it, instead of you feeling like, woo, you're like, oh, slow. Like it's a little bit better for the reader, and it makes it a little bit easier for the reader's eyes to travel over it to the next word, which is really important. Then you also have things like capitalized, boldface, italics, underline, thing like that. You need to make sure that those are formatted appropriately. Everything's about readability. You want your reader to be able to flow very easily from one word to the next. You want to make sure that you use your special characters appropriately, so your trademark and your copyright symbols, you want to make sure that you use those right and that they're always the right size. You also want to make sure that you use ellipses appropriately. Now, when we're talking about design, ellipses take a space before the ellipse and after the ellipse, and that seems kind of like, like you don't really think about it that way, but that's something that they talk about in the Chicago Manual of Style, and it's also something that affects readability, so those kinds of things are important. And then you also want to be careful with word stacks. Word stacks are where you see the same word on several lines. So if you had like the word the, and then your next line was the, and then your next line was the, that can be distracting to the reader. So now that I've thrown all this information out at you, you're probably wondering, okay, well, how do I do any of that? Well, the program that I like to use is InDesign. InDesign it requires some technical proficiency. For all of the Adobe suite, pretty much, like the Photoshop and Illustrator and all that, there's a pretty steep learning curve. I went to school for journalism, so I was taught how to use the Adobe programs while I was in school, so I have a little bit of experience with it. It's not too difficult for me. There are a ton of YouTube videos that will show you how to use these programs, and it's really pretty easy. Once you get the hang of it, it's pretty simple. Obviously, it's a paid program. It's not free, so you have to factor in the cost of that, but when you compare the cost of buying the program and doing it yourself to the cost of paying a professional to do it, you're saving a lot of money. I went through 1106 Design. They're the company who did Return to Royalty, and they did everything you see here. They did the cover, they did the spine, they did the back, they did the inside. I got proofreading. I got a lot of stuff with them. They did a really great job, and I'm really, really happy with the way that Return to Royalty turned out. The only thing is that they were expensive. For the package that I got, if it hadn't been part of the award that I received for the competition, it probably would have cost me somewhere in the neighborhood of $4,000. So when you think about it in that perspective, that's a lot of money. So if I am going to go with 1106 Design for the future books in the Return to Royalty series, it's going to cost me quite a bit of money. So for me, learning how to use InDesign and learning how to do these particular things in InDesign, in the long run, that's going to save me a lot of money. I might spend $100, $200 on InDesign over the course of a year because it's a subscription, but ultimately I'm going to save myself a lot of money. But if you're not technically savvy and you're worried that you won't be able to do it right, there are templates that you can download. CreateSpace, I know, has free templates that you can download for like Microsoft Word, or if you use a free word processor like Office Libre or something like that. There are templates that you can download. They're not going to be professional caliber. They're going to be good for what you want, but they're not going to be traditional publisher style, and that's ultimately what you want to go for. Readers are conditioned to a certain look inside of a book, and so you want to make sure that your book looks like the rest of the books on the shelves, at least to the eye. Like I said, professional designers are a little expensive. If you decide to go with a professional, I say this all the time, do your research, make sure you know what you're getting. Make sure that you have a good contract. Make sure you read your contract. I know a lot of us, we see the terms and conditions and we're like, oh, okay, accept. Make sure you read your contract. You want to know what you're getting. You want to make sure that once the work is completed that you own it, that there's no royalties due to the company or to the whoever that you pay to do your design. You just want to make sure that everything's on the up and up. Because it's a lot of money. You're spending a lot of money, and this book is really important to you, and you want to make sure that everything is right. Like I said, it's really important. Your interior design is really important, and I would say in order of importance, you have your cover is your number 1 most important, your back cover is your number 2 most important, and then how does it look on the inside is your number 3 most important. So tomorrow, Tuesday, we're going to talk about back covers. We're going to talk about what is a synopsis, what's a tagline, what's a blurb, and what should you put on the back cover of your book. So stay tuned, and I will see you guys tomorrow.